As it turns out, he could, in fact, do this all day. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the fifth film in the MCU, Marvel's 2011 action-adventure war superhero movie, Captain America: The First Avenger. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and recommendations. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and even some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Captain America: The First Avenger stars Chris Evans, Hayley Atwell, and Hugo Weaving, and was directed by Johnston. Set during World War II, it tells the story of Steve Rogers, a frail man who's transformed into the super soldier, Captain America. With the rise in popularity of comic book movies over the last few decades, we've been treated to a lot of superhero characters. This started out with the more obvious characters, but now even companies like Marvel have dug into the depths of their back issues to introduce characters not widely known to the average movie-going non-comic book reader. With the prevalence of films featuring these comparatively obscure characters nowadays, it always makes the tentpole character films stand out a bit. You know, the movies about characters that everybody has at least heard of, even if they're not a comic book fan. After nearly 40 films, the MCU has stretched itself out, expanding far and wide beyond those types of universally known tentpole characters. But that makes revisiting Phase 1 of this franchise an eye-opening experience now. One of familiarity and simplicity. And what better example of that than the fifth film in the MCU, Captain America: The First Avenger. As the fourth and final origin story character introduction of Phase 1, this film acted as the final piece of the puzzle, completing the setup for the much-anticipated superhero team-up movie, The Avengers. That team-up may have been the end goal of everything that came before, but as a result, we ended up with one of the Phase's best films in Captain America. Of all of the MCU's solo character movies, I would argue that Captain America: The First Avenger is one of, if not the most, traditionally structured superhero movies in the franchise. Maybe partly owing to its period setting, this film just oozes classic, earnest superhero idealism. Some may view it as a bit cheesy or over-sentimental, preferring the sarcasm and self-smugness of more modern-styled comic book movie fare, but there's something about this film's tone that just feels right for both its story and its title character. As a Phase 1 movie tasked with introducing one of the core Avengers, this film was responsible for laying a lot of the groundwork, not just for the character of Captain America, but also for the franchise as a whole. The First Avenger is an origin story in the truest sense, introducing us to Steve Rogers, the skinny and frail kid from Brooklyn. We spend an entire act with him in his original state, getting a sense of who he is before his superhero transformation and circuitous journey to becoming Captain America. But then, on top of all of that origin story material, this film also presents us with Captain America's first major mission as a superhero. Plus, a charming romance subplot, extensive sci-fi plotting that would have franchise repercussions for phases to come, and the very beginnings of Steve's Avengers journey. That's a lot to cover in only 2 hours. It threatens to be too much at times, and maybe it is in reality, considering how much of the plot is montaged through, but somehow it does still remain a satisfying and surprisingly straightforward story. Captain America is a character from another time, both literally and figuratively. Obviously, within the MCU, he's a temporally displaced man from the 1940s, but eventually finding himself a fish out of water in the modern world. But Captain America, the comic book character, is also very much from another time. Created in 1940, with his oh-so-subtle superhero name, uniform, and shield emblazoned with the colors and symbols of the American flag, and penchant for punching Nazis in the face, it's clear that this was a character born of wartime propaganda. He was initially meant to embody the nationalistic feelings of American idealism, of the self-perception of America as a global protector, and the power and strength of, at least initially, the little guy. This was all very patriotically rah-rah during World War II, and perhaps occasionally during other periods of wartime since, but is a comparatively tough sell in society's modern climate. And yet, this movie manages to do it, somehow sidestepping the jingoistic potential, even acknowledging and poking fun at the propagandist origins of the character, instead sticking to plain old wholesome idealism and a never-give-up attitude. It's a cheesy, perhaps naively simplistic view of the world, but an easy one to support, endearing Steve Rogers to us from the get-go. And Chris Evans stepped into that role wonderfully. A far cry from his previous turn in a Marvel movie as the showboaty, womanizing Johnny Storm in the 2005 Fantastic Four and its sequel. Here, he feels extremely earnest, and there's definite heart to him. And the personality and characterization established here really laid the groundwork for what was to come with this character as he moved into the 21st century, and had to team up with some bigger, more arrogant personalities. Even though this film features arguably the most traditionally heroic comic book character of the MCU, and follows one of the most classic origin story arcs of the franchise, the First Avenger does manage to stylistically distinguish itself some. To be fair, it was still fairly early in the MCU when this film came to fruition, so the blueprint, tropes, and general MCU-isms weren't as established as they are now nearly a decade and a half later. But beyond that, one of the biggest factors here is the setting. Set in the early 1940s, at the height of World War II, this was the first period film of the MCU, and for a long time, the only one, eventually being joined by Captain Marvel and most recently, the Fantastic Four First Steps. The period costumes and production design helped to set it apart from the modern or cosmically set MCU movies that came before and would soon come after. But there's a slight twist, a glossy sleekness to the period setting imbued by some retro-futurist elements of sci-fi, namely the super soldier program and some Tesseract-enhanced weaponry. It all takes on a distinctly comic booky feel that comes across a bit campy at times, especially with the dated roughness of some of the visual effects. Excessive green screen, a character transformation that sits right on the precipice of the uncanny valley, and rubbery-looking speed ramping all contribute to an almost otherworldly comic book style that feels slightly at odds with the otherwise character-grounded story. But even those visual issues can't take away from the film's entertaining strengths, and its solid handling of the introduction of one of the most integral characters of the MCU. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one is the film's period setting. This was the first period film in the MCU, and remains one of only 3 to this day. Set in the early 1940s, at the height of World War II, this period setting factors into not only the style, but the story as well. With its retro-futurist sci-fi elements and wartime setting, it feels unique among the movies of the MCU, which is almost always a positive thing. This period setting also allows for an interesting, almost meta look at the history of this character, taking us through stages of his comic book evolution with the various costume alterations, and even slyly incorporating some playful digs at the character's propagandist origins. The second pro is the story. So this was something I was almost initially mixed on. Admittedly, it has to cram way too much in only 2 hours. An origin story, its own superhero adventure, and then an awful lot of setup for the Avengers and beyond. But despite that very full task load, this movie still manages to deliver a satisfying and pretty straightforward superhero origin story. I realize that some people may be craving a bit more story complexity or ingenuity from their comic book movies, but sometimes you just need a very classic superhero tale, and this movie delivers just that in all its earnest, entertaining glory. On the con side, the biggest issue has got to be the visual effects. Some of the visuals here are fine, so it's not everything, but a good chunk of them now stand out in a negative way to me. Part of this can be chalked up to dated technology. I mean, this film is 14 years old at this point, but I think a lot of it was a stylistic choice to give things a sort of heightened, campy, super comic booky look and feel. So stretchy, physics-defying speed ramped shots are less a consequence of old green screen technology and more an artifact of just some strange choices that, for me at least, feel out of place and especially at odds with the film's period setting. Con number 2 is Red Skull. I know, an MCU villain making it onto the cons? How unexpected. The franchise's long-standing difficulty with crafting compelling villains aside, there's just not all that much to this character. He's got a weird and kind of unsettlingly cool design, and of course having an evil Nazi as a villain is about as classic as you can get, but I have to say, every time the story shifts to focus on him and his overly sci-fi world domination plans, the momentum screeches to a halt. Maybe it's because I always get wrapped up and invested in Steve's story, or maybe it's just because Red Skull's plans feel like nothing more than an excuse to introduce the Tesseract and set up for future movies, but that whole B-plot to this film is just so uninteresting to me. Before I give you my rating recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Captain America: The First Avenger, or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy through one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them, if you're in the market for any of these movies, or anything else. I'm gonna give Captain America: The First Avenger 3.5 out of 5 paws. It's a fitting introduction for the character of Captain America, and one of the best movies of Phase 1 of the MCU. The story is very straightforward, and the visual effects are often rubbery looking and underwhelming, but the retro-futuristic 1940s period setting helped to combat these issues by giving the film a distinct feel. And Chris Evans does an excellent job embodying the earnestness and innocent charm of Steve Rogers, providing important groundwork for what would come over the next 8 years of films. I would recommend Captain America: The First Avenger to anybody looking for a classic-feeling superhero movie within the MCU. As a Phase 1 character introduction movie, this film came along early in the development of the MCU, serving to lay character and story groundwork, as well as helping to establish some of the expectations and tropes the franchise still uses to this day. There are some sci-fi elements that come into play, but this might be among the most traditionally structured superhero origin story films within the franchise, even within its atypical for the MCU period setting. Even if you're not somebody who's particularly interested in a traditional superhero movie, this is still a good and important starting point for anybody who wants to understand Captain America and why he's the way he is in the modern world of the MCU. If you liked Captain America: The First Avenger, I would recommend Wonder Woman. This is essentially the analogous film within the DCEU. It's set in World War I rather than II, but sees another superhero on the European front lines, features a similar climax, and even has a Steve played by a Chris. If you like the style and period setting here, you'll want to check out The Rocketeer. Also directed by Joe Johnston, this early 90s superhero movie is set in a retro-futuristic late 1930s and follows a stunt pilot who finds a rocket pack and uses it to fight Nazis. And if you'd like another sci-fi tinged World War II movie, you should watch Overlord. This action horror film follows a paratrooper squad sent to destroy a German military target in an occupied French village, only to find themselves in the midst of a much more horrific situation once they discover a secret Nazi research facility. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Captain America: The First Avenger? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite superhero period film? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe if you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainely Movies, the way life should be.